This is Dateline News and Conversation. I've had to step back a little bit to try to absorb what has been happening over just the last week. There's been an attempt on Putin's life. There have been two Russian bridges, civil transportation, that have been blown up. And just Monday morning, Sunday night, the attack on 5 of Russia's nuclear bases, where they store their bombers, long-range bombers, nuclear armed, in the event of a nuclear war. And then we had the charade of a meeting between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul, which resulted in no further peace progress, but the exchange of prisoners and Russia's offer to return 6,000 dead Ukrainians. And then we had the attack on the Crimean Bridge at Kerch, the attempted attack. So I've been trying to just sit back and absorb, tune out all the noise. Everybody is talking about what will Putin do next. My guest tonight is my good friend. He's actually probably the only American, maybe the only expert in the entire world on what we're facing today. He has been an advocate to promote space for peace. He's been an advocate of no weapons and nuclear power in space. It's the name of his organization, the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. And Donald Trump has recently proclaimed the commitment to spend billions, probably millions, on a golden dome. Bruce Gagnon, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Regis. I just have to make one correction. I work with all kinds of wonderful people around the world who are experts on this issue of the weaponization, the militarization, the nuclearization of space. So please don't forget about all those people that I work with all the time for many years, since we founded the Global Network in 1992. Good to be with you.
Okay, you're way too humble and modest, but I do acknowledge all of the people around the world who have worked with you for some 30, 40 years on this issue. Bruce, I almost don't know where to start. For the first time in my life, I'm feeling kind of helpless. I can't really believe what's happened just in the last week. As everybody knows, I'm living in Russia. These attacks on Russia that I just outlined in the beginning have all of the mainstream media, all of the alt media commenting on the significance of what has just happened, especially the attack on 5 of Russia's air bases, part of their nuclear triad. And everybody is wondering what Putin is going to do next. I don't know if we're going to get into that tonight, but Bruce, I would like your analysis in light of Trump's braggadocious claim to build a Star Wars on steroids, a golden dome covering the entire North American continent and the connection with what's been happening in the last 4 or 5 days. Bruce, help me figure this out.
Well, let me first start with an article I saw yesterday. I put it on my blog today. And the story is that Brazil's President Lula, just interviewed by Le Monde, the French major newspaper, Le Monde, Lula said in that interview that Joe Biden told him that the United States was going to destroy Russia or wanted to destroy Russia. Now, that's a big public admission. And I really am grateful to President Lula for sharing that story. I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise, but it comes as confirmation as to what the real US and NATO, the European Union agenda is. They are out to destroy Russia. Now, you've probably heard me say and write many times that one day I just out of pure curiosity, I did a internet search with the question, how many times has Russia been invaded? And I learned that Sweden, for example, this is over a 500-year period. Sweden has invaded Russia 12 times. Of course, we know about Napoleon in France. We know about Hitler's Germany when the Soviet Union lost 27 million people in World War II fighting the Nazis. In comparison, the United States lost about 450,000 people. Not insignificant, of course, but still nothing in comparison to the suffering that the Soviet citizens had to go through. And so I see everything in this context today. There's been this long effort on the part of Western colonizers to destroy Russia, break it up into pieces so they can steal their resources. And don't we know by now that all wars basically are created as resource wars? So if you start there, I think it's a little easier to grasp the bigger picture. I read today a French former military, high-level military person saying that it was impossible for Ukraine to do these strikes against Russian airfields deep inside of Russia, even all the way out to Siberia, right? Without US satellite intelligence. Well, the White House is saying that Trump didn't know anything about it. Oh, big surprise. Oh, shock, shock, horror, horror. But the truth of the matter is, the US knew about it. They were involved in it. It couldn't have been done without the CIA and MI6 from England, their complicity. And everybody that I respect is saying that. So this is really important. You know, during the height of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, it never would have occurred to the United States to launch an attack deep inside of Russia at their nuclear triad because it would have created World War III, a nuclear war, and the United States would have been wiped out. But today, the leadership we have in Washington and in NATO from Europe is so outrageously insane and arrogant that they think they can get away with something like this and not have any repercussions. I mean, that you want to talk about walking a tightrope and playing with fire. These people are sick. They are really, really evil and sick. And if the public doesn't speak up about this and forget about being afraid that you're going to be called a Putinista, a Putin sympathizer, we're talking about here the United States playing with the end of the world. This is too dangerous.
Well, you know, Bruce, you're very much aware you were supporting the film that I made in 2016, 30 Seconds to Midnight, the Bureau of Atomic Scientists had their doomsday clock at 3.5 minutes, and I called my film 30 Seconds to Midnight. Bruce, if I were to publish that film today, the title would be The Final Countdown, 5, 4, and Holding. That's how close I think we are. Now, let's talk about now the bigger picture and what the plan of the United States could possibly be. They have to know, as you indicated, they are playing with, people are saying fire, they're playing with the end of the world. But behind all of this, Trump has come up with this golden dome, a Star Wars on steroids that Ronald Reagan was so committed to. And in his talks with Mikhail Gorbachev, which eventually led to nuclear arms treaties, several, he just could not give up the commitment to Star Wars. When Gorbachev has said, let's get rid of all nuclear weapons. Bruce, where are we today with this Star Wars mania?
Well, to really comprehend this, I think it's good to go back to 1997 when the United States Space Command published a document called Vision for 2020. And in that document, the US Space Command said that we will control space and dominate space and deny other countries access to space. And outside of the Space Command headquarters building at Peterson Air Force in Colorado is the slogan, Master of Space, the logo of the US Space Command that their troops wear as a patch on their uniform. So first of all, here, 3 or 4% of the world's population in the United States thinking that they can control space, and they can dominate space, and they can keep Russia and China and other countries out of space. Very aggressive and very ridiculous. And since the time of Ronald Reagan creating his SDI program, Strategic Defense Initiative, and that was when I started working on space, by the way, in 1982, when I was living in Orlando, Florida, just an hour away from the Space Center at Cape Canaveral. They've spent well over $400 billion since that time on these programs. When Bill Clinton came into office, he announced that Reagan's SDI was over. He was defunding it. And everybody cheered, oh, that's great. People in the peace movement. Bruce, you don't have to work on this anymore. Why are you still doing this? Because Clinton canceled SDI. But what they didn't know was the very next day, Clinton created BIMDO, BMDO, the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, and he moved the money from SDI into BIMDO, and they continued doing the work. When George W. Bush became president, he got rid of BIMDO and he named it Missile Defense Agency, and they continued doing the work to the present time. And now Trump is basically changing the name from MDA, Missile Defense Agency, into Golden Dome. And he wants $25 billion this year in 2025 to expand the operations on it. And the Congressional Budget Office is already saying that the lifetime cost of Golden Dome will run between $550 billion additional money to up to several trillion dollars. Now let's put that in some context. Today, the United States has $37 billion of debt. And the Congress is now reporting that Trump's new big, beautiful bill, or whatever it was called, with tax cuts for the rich, cuts in social programs, more corporate welfare, funding for this Golden Dome, it's going to be $2.5 trillion more of debt. So that takes us close to $40 trillion in debt, which means our economy is going to collapse real fast. And so the Achilles heel of Trump's program, as bad as it does have an Achilles heel, and it's the money. They can't afford to do it. And if they do, they get rid of Social Security, they get rid of Medicare, Medicaid, they get rid of every food stamps, they get rid of every social program in the country. Maybe then they could afford it, but still, it won't work because of its own material contradictions. And the contradictions are that Russia and China have hypersonics that can avoid any so-called interceptor trying to take them out when they're flying to attack the United States in a retaliatory attack. Let me tell a story to illustrate this point. Over the years, I've read repeatedly in Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine that at the Space Command, now we're calling it the Space Force, at their headquarters, they annually do a computer war game called the Red Team versus the Blue Team. And in that computer war game, the US launches a first strike attack on Russia and China, trying to take out their nuclear retaliatory capability, similar to what the US and Ukraine just did last few days ago, hitting nuclear bombers sitting on the runway in Russia. And in this computer war game, the idea is take out as much of the land-based, underground-based, and sea-based nuclear forces of Russia. And then when they try to launch a retaliatory strike in this computer war game, they use their so-called missile defense system, or now this Golden Dome, to pick off any retaliatory strikes by Russia and China, giving the US a quote-unquote successful first strike attack. So this is what Golden Dome is. It's part of this agenda that Biden told Lula about, that we're going to destroy Russia. And they don't stop. They keep going. They keep trying to find new ways to do it. This is their program.
All right, Bruce, I have to ask you this. You know, going back to Reagan and then Bush and Obama and Bush and Trump and Biden and now Trump again, do you think any of these presidents have really been in charge? Do you think Trump is in charge of anything right now, in light of the fact that they're claiming he didn't even know about this? What are your thoughts about that? Who the heck is really in charge of this goal to destroy Russia?
The deep state, the neocons. It was the neocons that created the 2014 coup d'etat in Kiev, that installed a Nazi-backed government, that then unleashed almost immediately after the coup d'etat, and the installation of this Nazi-backed government by Victoria Nuland, then Hillary Clinton's Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. So that's the neocons. So it's the neocons, the deep state. I don't believe that Trump didn't know anything about this. I think that they all knew about it, at the highest level, but they agreed with it. They don't have a problem with it. They're trying to instigate a reaction by Russia to hit England or Germany or Poland in retaliation, which would then kick in Article 5 of the NATO treaty, right? And then they'd have their excuse that they've been waiting for, to have full-bore warfare against Russia. I mean, Starmer, the prime minister in England, is telling their country, we've got to prepare for war with Russia. We've got to dramatically increase the military budget. Merz, the new chancellor of Germany, is saying the same thing there. Sweden, I just put in our newsletter an article from Sweden that says we're going to have 500,000 people die when we go to war with Russia. We have to be prepared. We got to find places to bury them all. I mean, these people are nuts. But this is where they're going. This is where they're heading. So who controls Washington? I think it's number one, Wall Street. Number two, the military industrial complex. And number three, AIPAC, as we see them force the United States to the Congress to continue to fund Israel's genocidal attacks on Palestine, both in Gaza and now the West Bank too. I'm just rereading a book by David Talbot about Dulles, Alan Dulles, who became the early in the early years of the formation of the CIA. He was a CIA director. During World War II, he was working for the OSS for the United States out of Switzerland. He was helping the Nazis cover up their genocide of the Jewish people. This is a guy that goes on to become the head of the CIA in the United States. He's a lifelong Nazi. He helped Nazis escape the Nuremberg tribunals at the end of World War II. And so Alan Dulles put in motion a deep state government in the United States. And that's why they assassinated John F. Kennedy, because he fired Dulles. He wanted to break CIA up because he knew what they were doing. That's why he was killed. And so ever since then, though, the CIA has been running this country, running the foreign policy of this country. That's what I think, but that's also what I know because of my own study over the years of these issues.
Well, I'm glad you got to that. People talk about the deep state, they talk about the neocons, and you mentioned Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and IPAC, but you got to Alan Dulles and the creation of the CIA and Special Operations Section of the CIA, and they are a rogue entity. No oversight, no supervision, nothing. And Bruce, you also mentioned the connection to MI6, which is the UK, Britain's intelligence services. It's been Great Britain, the UK, who have been behind the hatred of Russia for, well, you can go all the way back to the Crimean War. It's been their goal to do this. And I believe, and I think you also believe, that between the CIA and MI6, these entities, these people, whoever the hell they are in control of the foreign policy of the West against Russia. Bruce, this is incredibly dangerous. This raises some serious questions that Americans should be waking up to. Who the hell is in charge? Your thoughts?
Well, I agree 100%. Certainly not the people of this country, certainly not the taxpayers who are funding all of this nonsense, all of these shenanigans, all of this evil warmongering that the United States is doing in our name, right? The time has come for the American people to wake up and to, see what's happening here. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I want to say a couple more things about space, though. Right now, today, there are 12,000 satellites orbiting lower Earth orbit. But lower Earth orbit is becoming congested imagine a grocery store parking lot, and there are very few remaining parking spaces. That's what's happening in lower Earth orbit. And most of the satellites in lower Earth orbit were put there by Elon Musk's or a company called SpaceX. And most of them are warfighting satellites. Starlink. In fact, they're providing Ukraine with satellite reconnaissance and targeting information from these satellites in lower Earth orbit that they use to attack Russia. Now, China and Russia have, in comparison, very few of these satellites in lower Earth orbit. And they're speaking out saying, wait a minute, United States does not have the right to take full control of lower Earth orbit. Again, going back to the 97 Space Command document Vision for 2020 that said the US will control space, dominate space, and deny other countries access to space. That's what they're trying to do now in lower Earth orbit. Because if the US has near or full control of lower Earth orbit, they can see everything and they can do space-directed warfare on anybody. And those countries will have a harder time reacting, seeing what's going on, and responding. Elon Musk has asked for permission from the US government to launch 30,000 more satellites into lower Earth orbit. But there's a problem. I was just interviewed the other day by an old friend, and he put into the video after we were finished a statement from 1989 by Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, one of the early moonwalkers. And in 89, he spoke at a protest I organized with the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, saying that one war in space will be the one and only, because the Kessler syndrome will be created. In other words, so much orbiting space junk, space debris, that we will be entombed to the planet forever, that we won't be able to get a rocket off the planet because it'll be like a minefield in lower Earth orbit, circulating the Earth, and we wouldn't be able to get a rocket through it. Or if it got through it, it wouldn't be able to last more than a couple days in orbit before it was smashed to bits. So it's become an environmental catastrophe the space program has. And in addition, when all these launches are happening, as the toxic pollution from the launch rises into the atmosphere, it's punching a larger hole in the ozone layer. So this is a multifaceted issue, not only about peace, but also about environmental degradation of space, but also the Earth below because of the destruction of the ozone layer. So these are things people should really be aware of. And the United States is leading the way in this whole thing. Now, for many years, at least 30 years, China and Russia have gone to the United Nations General Assembly, where they've introduced a resolution calling for a global ban on weapons in space. Close the door to the barn before the horse gets out. And at the General Assembly, a vote is taken. It's a non-binding resolution at that point, calling for a new treaty to be negotiated at the UN. And the US and Israel vote no, but the rest of the world votes yes. It is then sent to Geneva to the Permanent Conference on Disarmament for further negotiation. And there, the United States and Israel block it through Republican and Democrat administrations. And the official line of the US is, hey, there's no problem in space, man. We don't need a new treaty. Don't worry about it. So that's where we are today. And why doesn't the United States want a treaty? Because they want to destroy Russia. And they know that space control and domination is the key to them being able to attempt to do that.
Yeah, we've talked about this many times before. I've included this in my film 30 Seconds to Midnight, in which you played a significant role. The plan for 2020. It's really very scary, but it looks like it's coming to a culmination. Um, this space arms race is simply not affordable. What's going to happen is the United States is forcing Russia and primarily China. I don't know what the secondary players are going to do. India, Pakistan, France, England, North Korea. I don't know how they're going to play in this game. But Bruce, I mean, we're talking not billions of dollars, we're talking trillions of dollars that these, whatever it is, 8 or 9 countries just don't have. And correct me if I'm wrong, somebody in the United States made the statement that space is the new theater for war. Is that true? I read that somewhere. I don't know if it's been verified.
Absolutely. And getting back to how expensive it is, the US is already saying that Canada wants to be part of it. And the reason why the US, I'm sure, wants Canada in there, they want them to help pay for it. And they're also going to hit up NATO. NATO is now moving into the in order to circle China and for war with China that the Pentagon is saying will happen around 2030. Well, it's going to be a space war. And so they're bringing in Japan and South Korea right now into the U.S. Space Force. They're making them component partners of the Space Force. And they're going to be doing this throughout NATO, helping gather funds from all those countries, gather launch sites in those countries on their lands. In England right now, there's a huge number of launch sites that are being developed. And one of them is reportedly already being taken over by none other than Lockheed Martin. In New Zealand, a launch site was built some years ago that on native people, indigenous people's lands. They were opposed to it, but they were told, don't worry, it's not going to be military. All the launches will be civilian. But as it turns out, Lockheed Martin took it over. They're running it. And all the launches so far have been military. So these are just two examples of how the United States is getting the allies to build launch sites. And so what would they do with all these launch sites, right? From all other parts of the world? Well, in a US NATO first strike attack on Russia and or China that I said is being war gamed everywhere, every year at the Space Force, if you have launch missiles coming at their command control centers and underground missile silos and military bases where the planes are sitting on the runway, and you have these missiles coming from all these different countries, right? From all these different avenues, if you will, it makes for a stronger first strike attack capability. Harder for Russia and China to deal with it as these things are coming at them. So this is what they're preparing now in all these stages across the world.
All right. So, Bruce, this begs the question. Russia certainly has known what's been going on for a number of years now. China, it's very clear they realize they're the next country, they're the next target. Washington, from Trump to Vance to all of these other people, are saying China is the enemy, the real enemy. And I have to ask you this. What do you think Russia primarily will do in response now that the nuclear threshold has been crossed?
Well, Vladimir Putin has shown since 2014 what I would consider extreme patience under the circumstances of US and NATO constant attacks, first on the Donbass, eastern Ukrainian region that is ethnically Russian. They've now, those areas within the Donbass have voted to become part of Russia, and they've been accepted back into Russia. So Putin and the Russian army have very steadily been pushing out the Ukrainian military out of the regions of eastern Ukraine. Then the US and Britain got Ukraine military to change their strategy, and they began to attack Kursk and Bryansk regions of the Russian Federation. And for some months, they occupied Kursk, killing a lot of civilians. They occupied it with about, I don't know, 40,000 troops or something like that, of Ukrainian troops and mercenaries from various NATO countries. But they've all been pushed out of there now. But they're still launching missiles and drones into those regions. But slowly but surely, Russia is pushing Ukrainian troops away from the borders of Russia. Really, I think, devastating the Ukrainian military, taking out so many of the pieces of equipment, tanks, planes, all, missiles, everything else that NATO, US and NATO have sent to Ukraine, to the point that the US and NATO are running out of a lot of these weapon systems. And so I think the reaction by Russia and Putin is to continue doing what we're doing. It's always been their goal to drive Ukrainian military away from the Russian border, to break up their military capability, to demand that they not be taken into NATO as a member, and to denazify the Ukrainian military. These are the essential demands that Russia has, from the start, been asking, demanding, and they continue today. All those demands have been rejected by Ukraine, the EU, NATO, and the United States.
Well, something else of real significance, I think, is happening, and not so much in the background anymore. I think it's very clear that Russia and China realize they are the primary enemies of this Western imperial hegemon. But former Defense Secretary of the Russian Federation, Shoigu, is right now meeting with Kim Jong-un and high North Korean officials. It's well known now and admitted that North Korea sent troops to help Russia repulse the offense in Kursk. Bruce, how do you see this playing out? You have what happened over the last 5 days, China watching this, North Korea watching this. Both of them know they're next. What do you see is going on?
Well, fortunately, they just had an election in South Korea where they got rid of the right-wing fascist president that they had, who tried to run a clampdown on the country. And people's movement in the streets basically defeated it. He got impeached, and they had the election now, and this, I guess you'd call him a liberal Democrat, has been elected, who promises a little more stability. So that's a good sign for the Korean Peninsula. But beyond that, you're right. Korea, North Korea, and China and Russia and Iran are the top enemies now of the West, of the Western colonizers, the imperialist colonizers. And They all know it, and they're all getting ready uh, for the big coming showdown, if you will, because it appears to me that the United States, NATO, EU, UK, they're not backing off. And so I think at the rate we're going, we very likely are going to see the use of nuclear weapons. One of the problems is the peace movement in the West. While very active right now on Gaza and Palestine, rightfully so, has really failed when it comes to the issue of the US NATO war on Russia. By and large, with some wonderful, notable exceptions, the peace movement has failed on this issue. I know this because I've been demonized because of the position I take on Russia by people within the peace movement, both in the United States and beyond. I know others who have been demonized as well for calling this situation clearly, naming it, calling it out, and identifying the West as the real purveyors of violence, as the real perpetrators of conflict with Russia. Russia didn't start this thing. So, you know, I'm really saddened to see people that I've known for years who just for whatever reason, and I'm sure there are myriad of reasons, they just can't find themselves to tell the truth about what's really happened here in this situation, this proxy war using Ukraine as the instrument, as Senator Lindsey Graham has repeatedly admitted publicly. He takes great joy in admitting it, that Ukrainians are doing the dying, keep going, we'll send you more guns and blah, blah, blah. It's crazy. I mean, how much more evidence do we need?
Yeah. And, you know, this is very problematic for me, really disheartening, what you've just described. The peace movement is now in the United States completely focused on the genocide in Gaza and Palestine. There's hardly any attention being paid to the threat, the nuclear threat, the end of all life on the planet. It's not going to come primarily from Israel's actions in Palestine, but what the United States, the UK, MI6, and the CIA have just done in the past week against Russia. I can't believe that Americans don't understand what's happening.
You know, in the last 2 or 3 days, I've had a email correspondence with a mutual friend of ours, Helen Caldicott, and she's on the Global Network Advisory Board. And we've been talking back and forth initially about global network things, but she is really, you know, she was a long time campaigner against nuclear weapons, one of the top ones in the world for years, back in the 80s and 90s and early, you know, in the early 2000s. And she's really worried right now, and she's frightened and about this prospect of a nuclear war, and really sees the United States and NATO as the provocative force behind this whole situation. So, and she's also saddened, as we are, about the state of the peace movement, refusing to admit who's really responsible for this conflict.
You know, you mentioned our dear mutual friend, Dr. Helen Caldicott, who, thanks to you, she agreed to let me interview her for my film, 30 Seconds to Midnight. And her opening in that film is horrific. People should watch this again. But, you know, what Helen said at the end of that film was the most sobering thing that I have ever imagined. And this, I'm going to paraphrase, but it's pretty close to exactly what she said. Are we an evolutionary aberration designed in an evolutionary sense not to survive? I wonder, she said. Bruce, I have to wonder. People have talked about evil. People have talked about satanic forces, the primordial fight against good and evil. But when you just look at us as a species, we've been killing each other since Cain and Abel with stones and sticks and spears, and then guns and cannons, and then nuclear weapons. And now this Homo sapiens, this wise human, has developed the capability to terminate all life on the planet.